Upon looking at the lore for Raider, I'm going to be completely real, I was about as shocked as when I realised these guys aren't actually called donkey balls. When it comes to FromSoftware's stories, I'm definitely biased, but the lore of Raider is truly something special. His quest line sheds so much light on so many different storylines, and in today's video I want to delve into all of it. I want to play a little game with you. If, at the end of the video, you have enjoyed, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. If you don't enjoy the video, drop a dislike and drop me a comment with some constructive criticism so I can improve the content for you all in the next one. Without any further dilly-daddling, please friends, sit back, relax, grab some succulent, juicy, tender and sensational prawns if you want, and enjoy. Runes are everywhere inside a base game Elden Ring, and contrary to what many people will tell you, they are translatable. These runes consist of Futhark. If you don't know what that is, it's the runic alphabet. At this point in time, I've translated quite a few pieces inside of Elden Ring. The important thing to take from this is runes have meanings, and the runes inside of Elden Ring, the ones inscribed upon discrete locations, do have meanings. They do have translations. Something that popped up a lot when I was translating, for example, the map obelisks, was this new language I wasn't familiar with. It was consisting of letters which really had no meaning and yet seemed to fit into a sentence I couldn't understand. And for a long time I've believed this is in fact the language of Elden Ring's world. I like to call it Elden Futhark, but that's a bit on the nose, and I'm aware it's about as generic as it comes. Elden Futhark was never something definitive, it was just a pet theory based on a few instances. But Nightreign changes this. Underneath the round table hold is the crypt, which holds the bodies of those who tried to stop the night long ago. Their purpose for being there is irrelevant at this moment. What is important is what is on their coffins. Two of them actually have direct translations on them. This is one of the only instances within Elden Ring that this is possible. Thanks to Scummage Info, I've been able to get a closer look, considering I don't have Nightreign on PC, and they do have words there. And there is definitely a sentence structure, although the language is nonsensical, or at least it seems it. Elden Ring has done an amazing job of making these runes translatable, and I don't think this is any different. Instead, I believe they genuinely made their own language, which isn't as far-fetched as it sounds, considering George R.R. Martin actually worked on base game Elden Ring where this language pops up. This would not be the first time George R.R. Martin has made a language, and I think that is exactly what has happened here. Something strange pops up when you compare the text between the two coffins. They're different. Now, at first glance, this didn't make much sense to me. Wait, it must be nonsense, right? The characters aren't the same between the words that should be the same, for example, the path of the cutting branch. And so I get it, the first thought is, it's gibberish, but I don't think it is the case. I just think we're missing the right ingredient to mix this up and make it right. Not only do I think they've created their own language, but I also think they've created their own linguistic tools. Inside of the crypts... Fucking hell, firework. Inside the crypts, there are 3 translations you can read. Each one has a few common words, and yet the same symbol does not pop up in each new translation. This actually makes a lot of sense. The first 2 translations are on coffins. The people who wrote the inscriptions were most likely the people dying, or well, better put, sacrificing themselves. The third one is a generalised speech. It's one that speaks for all the people who have been entombed here. Inside of Elden Futhark, I believe that each word, how it's written, how it's spelt, is based on the emotion or the meaning behind those words. For example, on the coffins, one might have been sad, the other one might have been grief-stricken, might have been angry. The final translation being a generalised one, hence maybe a different spelling. I've just talked about the crypts, I've just talked about the language upon them. But they are not the only thing inside of Nightreign that bears this language. The other example is in fact the stone tablet inside of Raider's questline. This is an old story tablet which houses tournaments of the lands between. Its divine magic chooses an opponent and their battle is carved upon the stone, in the very same language as the one inside the crypts. These very same tablets, the one we see in Raider's questline, can be seen piled up inside of Marika's bedchambers. They even have the same little swirl at the top of the tablet. The tablets inside of Marika's bedchambers also share the same language as the one inside the crypts and on the tablet inside of Raider's questline. Considering everything we're about to talk about, I think there's quite a few possibilities on why this is there. Either she feels really guilty about the bloody conquests and battles in the Colosseum she has commanded, or she has them there as trophies. Either one has merit, and I'll leave it up to you to decide which one you think is best. And it goes actually a lot further. All throughout the Lands Between and Limveiled, you'll notice these tablets piled up everywhere. They are a common occurrence, and before now we didn't know what they were for. The answer, in fact, is they are tournaments, or well, the history of tournaments hidden with magic within stone. Inside of things like the map obelisks, there's a lot of references to ice and fire. I originally thought this was a reference to George R.R. Martin, but I also see it now as a possibility that it's talking about the dual nature. They are fighting each other. And what is the map obelisk? In fact, it's a glorified tablet, the same sort of thing that would be used to hold these memories of tournaments. Again, I urge you to go back after this video and watch those previous videos so you can understand where I'm coming from and use this video as a guide for those older videos. Hell, perhaps you'll notice something in those videos that links in with this video that I'd missed, and feel free to tell me if that is the case. Interestingly enough, these tournaments were held by someone called the God of War, Grynn. Upon touching the monument and being transported to this realm, you'll notice you're inside of a Colosseum. The Colosseums are something we don't get much information on. It's sort of a semi-DLC that popped up around a few months after Elden Ring's release, and they are very mysterious. The one inside of Raider's questline is no doubt one of these Colosseums, but one we've never been in before. But that's the same for a lot of the Colosseums inside the Lands Between. They're all a little different, so I don't think that can be drawn as a point to not take inspiration from the Colosseums we've seen previously. There are a few similarities between the Colosseums. First of all is the architecture, how the brick lane is. The symbols of lions and dual trees, wink wink. These things are unanimous with the Colosseums, and I think if we saw the entrance we'd also see this in Raider's questline. If you actually take a further look at the Colosseums, you'll notice a similarity between their walls and the walls of Belrut. I've probably butchered that, so please don't crucify me. Another similarity between the two cities is actually the brick lane. The actual laying of the bricks is exactly the same between Belrut and with the Colosseums. If you need further proof, a big sign of the Hornsent was their divine dancing lions. Now we know these aren't actually lions, they're puppets, but there must have been some symbology with the lions for them to be warranted as divine, and I believe there definitely was. Coincidentally, in all the entrances of the Colosseums you'll notice lions. In fact, on the depictions of what they think is the Erd Tree is two lion heads sticking out of it. I've wondered for a very long time how Marika was able to string along the people of the Lands Between, for she wouldn't have been able to kill everyone from the Hornsent's age. And the simple answer to the question I've been thinking about for a really long time is she didn't need to eliminate them, she just had to manipulate them. Something you may or may not know is the people that created Aniralim, that created Belrut, are the same people who created the Colosseums. This is what we talked about earlier, but something I didn't mention is the symbols which share in common between Belrut, the Colosseums, and the Colosseum we see in Raider's questline, which further cements the idea that whoever originally created the idea of these tablets, whoever created the Colosseums in general, and Aniralim, were connected, and they were the same people. And I don't believe this is the Hornsent. This has some major implications that we're going to go on to further in the video. But regardless of who created them, I think upon Marika inheriting the world, she changed them, she altered them, and instead of having the dual tree we see in Aniralim, we instead have this single tree, one of the Erd Tree. But instead of fully erasing the sign of the Skadu tree, I believe she phased in the single tree, the Erd Tree, slowly. I believe this is a subtle way to try and manipulate the populace of the Lands Between into believing the Erd Tree is just the same as the Skadu tree, and as the generations go by and the information is lost, people just forget about the Skadu tree altogether. It's ingenious. Marika used the culture, the lions, the trees, the idea of tourneys through magical tablets, everything to manipulate the populace and become the ruling god. the person who controls everything. Considering all the connections inside of Raider's questline to the Colosseums, it's quite easy to come to the conclusion that the person who originally came up with the idea for the tablets is the same one who came up with the idea for the Colosseums. The marionette inside of the Round Table Hold says these tournaments were held by the god of war Grynn. I think I audibly shit myself when I first heard this dialogue. It very clearly seems to be talking about the Nameless King. At first glance it seems like a harmless reference, something that's just a throwaway piece of dialogue. But this is not the case, and there is so much more to this, and a lot of evidence that the Nameless King has a bigger role to play than we originally thought. Starting off, because I know this is going to be something that people are going to say. Inside of Dark Souls, it's said that the Farum Knights worship Farum, who is the god of war. And so for a really long time, people have believed the Nameless King's name is Farum. And when it comes to Dark Souls, and it comes to that time period, I 100% believe this. But something you've got to take into consideration is the different time periods and different areas. A great example being Marika's people. They're called two different names, Newman and Shaman, and yet they are exactly the same. There's no difference between the two groups. But all is not lost when it comes to the names, for if you look at all of Gwynn's children, you'll notice they begin with a G. Guinevere, Gwyndolin, Gwyn himself. It makes sense that the real name for the Nameless King would begin with a G too, Grynn. I believe the name Farum was just something that was adapted later on after his name was annulled from history. But actually the name Farum does help us in our quest to understand the Nameless King's involvement inside of Elden Ring, for there is a place inside of Elden Ring called Farum Azula. Farum Azula is a place that exists outside of time in an eternal storm, guarding Placidus, who's waiting for his lord, his god, to return. Both Farum Azula and the Nameless King are associated with dragons. He creates a sanctuary for them at Archdragon Peak. It is quite literally a city of dragons. They're everywhere, just like Farum Azula is. Farum Azula was a city that once existed in the sky before being struck down to pieces upon the lands between. Coincidentally, when we start the boss battle for Nameless King, a storm arises and it sweeps all over the Archdragon Peak. Coincidence again? Absolutely not. I believe in the timeline of Elden Ring, a different event occurred to what we experience in Dark Souls 3. I do believe the storm occurred as we see in Dark Souls 3, but instead of us defeating the Nameless King was never defeated, and so the storm rages on, and Farum Azula was born. And as time passed, this tornado, this wind, propelled the city into the sky, becoming the floating city of Farum Azula. Farum Azula was home to the ancient dragons. Ancient dragons inside of Elden Ring can be categorised by their four wings. The drakes, which are a subsection of the ancient dragons descending from Baal, aren't ancient dragons. They are drakes, which we can see by their two wings. The dragon the Nameless King rides in his boss battle is a four-winged storm drake. In my eyes, this is enough proof, considering the connection between the Nameless King and Farum Azula, to say that this is an ancient dragon. But what takes this even further is when you kill this dragon, and the Nameless King sacrifices its body, lightning expels everywhere. Inside of Elden Ring, lightning is synonymous with the ancient dragons. They have their own red lightning, but this can be explained why it's yellow inside of Archdragon Peak due to the fact this is a storm drake. I believe in an age-long past there were subspecies of ancient dragons, and the storm drake is just one of them. Or perhaps even the original, an ancestor of the ancient dragons we see inside of Elden Ring. I can feel it. You thought we were done. You thought there could be no more connections. That is, until you actually look at the Colosseums further. Inside of base game Elden Ring, on the floor of the Colosseums, on a few of them, there is actually this symbol that looks eerily similar to the sunlight medallion. It's not one-to-one, but it definitely looks like a sun. And then, if you look at the symbol on the floor inside of Raider's questline Colosseum, you'll notice it also looks like a sun. The Nameless King's symbol was a sunlight medallion. This is referenced all throughout the Dark Souls trilogy, and I believe this is once more a reference to that very fact, that very covenant, and to that very person that was the Nameless King. Considering the presence of the sunlight medallion symbol inside the Colosseums, the fact the architecture between Anir Elim, Belrats, the Colosseums, and the Archdragon Peak are all very similar with their bricklaying. The fact that tournaments used to be held by a god of war called Grynn, who held these tourneys in a time before the Erdtree, as we can see as the architecture and symbols are from the Hornson's age, which was known as a Crucible age. Not to mention the whole Farum bit. Putting all of this together, I think there's a very likely possibility that the Nameless King was an integral part to a certain part of Elden Ring's world. Some of you might be thinking is Gecko, where was he part of this world? What age was he a part of? And the most likely answer to that is Placidux's age. There's a mysterious item description to do with Placidux which hasn't made much sense and has been a centre of a lot of theorising. And considering today's video, I do believe the missing god that is talked about in Placidux's item descriptions, the one that fled, the one that disappeared, and Placidux is waiting for, is the Nameless King. Grynn, the god of war, the Nameless King, is a child of a god. He was, after all, the one that took the most after Gwyn himself. At the end of the second day, you get the chance of fighting the Nameless King. He's atop his drake, it has not died, and he has all his powers from Dark Souls 3. When you defeat him, it says Heir of Fire destroyed. I believe this is a direct reference to the fact that he is in line to become a god, and that he did become a god. He's the heir to his father's wishes, the heir to an age of fire, or perhaps in his case, an age of dragons. Which did happen in the primordial age of the Crucible, where Placidux reigned as the first Elden Lord. Everything points to the Nameless King being this god that fled, and I am completely convinced. The full height of Farum Azula is something we're never going to be able to see, but it's always been one of my favourite parts of the lore, and I think this edition in Nightreign has solved everything, and has brought so much clarity onto what Farum Azula really was. I want to talk about something before we go. Elden Ring Nightreign is not a perfect game. There are some criticisms that I do have, but overall I absolutely love this game. But something I'm not seeing people appreciate enough is the lore of this game. This game was created by the same team that created Elden Ring, and all the other recent FromSoftware games. The only difference being that Miyazaki isn't the one directing it. But that doesn't mean the talented people that worked on the other games aren't also working on Nightreign. The positive consequence of this is there is a lot of incredible lore inside this game. All I'm asking is don't throw away the idea of lore in Nightreign just yet, because there is so much. Anyway everyone, that's about it. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider leaving a like and subscribe as it greatly helps the channel. I'm not going to ramble on anymore. Please friends, don't you dare go hollow. And may you find your worth in the waking world. See you in the next one, and goodbye.